Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Joining me as always, the Prince of Twitter, the Regent of RedState.com, Andrew Malcolm at AH Malcolm on your Twitters is number one on your program and number one in your hearts.
That's right. Whatever
that is. You know, I got to tell you, I was thinking of you earlier today.
Oh, I'm touched.
Well, I don't know. Wait till you hear the story, then. So David Frum has a piece up at The Atlantic, which I think is a pretty smart piece, and I agree with it. And I don't always agree with David on stuff, but this is a pretty good piece. And the reason I was thinking about you is because he's talking about whether or not radical activists can actually succeed in turning, 2024 Chicago Democrat Convention into 1968 Democrat Convention. Now, they're certainly going to try. They're already organizing. The radicals are already organizing. And, I'm not quite old enough to remember it, but of course I know all about it. You were a pretty young reporter at the time, and you probably have better memories of this. But he made a good point. Which
I was there.
You were there. That's right. I forgot you were actually there reporting on this.
Yeah.
But David made a good point, which is that the conventions are a lot different than they used to be. And it started in 1998. It actually started before the 9/11 attacks, because and it was probably as a result of the Oklahoma City bombing that Bill Clinton signed a law that Congress had passed that basically made securing conventions a federal jurisdiction. They use local police, but they use federal money to do it. So starting with the 2000 conventions, and certainly going to my first convention was 2004, and you and I met in person, because we've been communicating a little bit before that, but we met in person at the 2008 convention.
That's right.
I don't think people really grasp how insulated those conventions are now. I mean, there's layers of security, and you can start a riot in Chicago. You might as well be in Gary, Indiana, because you're not going to get anywhere close to the conventions these days. I mean, it's almost impossible for them to do what it is that they're going to say, because 1968 Chicago was a much different thing. It was just local police. Nobody thought you'd have to have layers of security around this.
That's true. In 1968, the Democrat Convention was at the International Amphitheater, which was torn down about 30 years later. But it was on the far south, not far, but it was on the south side of Chicago. It was several miles from Grant Park. So the demonstrators had to have their fights somewhere else, and which they did in the streets. And the police were, Chicago police, Mayor Daley, they were very rough on them. I was looking out the window of the Hilton Hotel right on downtown in the Loop, and there were police on horses pushing the demonstrators with the horses' bodies, pushing them through the store windows below. It was pretty rough. And the cops were pretty rough. And I think that reflected the city at the time. It was a Democrat city. Mayor Daley ruled it, and then later his own son, or one of his sons. But the convention was several miles away. So there was really, they had security there, but there was really no problem getting in and out of the International Amphitheater. Interestingly, the International Amphitheater was the first place where the conventions were broadcast on TV. 1952, Eisenhower and Stevenson, and the equipment was so cumbersome and heavy and expensive that both parties agreed to have the convention in the same place, so television wouldn't have to move.
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, but
they haven't done that since. Although there's nothing preventing them from doing it, except maybe the sanity of the cities in question. They may, if they were exactly. Milwaukee, I mean, by the time you get to the second convention, Milwaukee would probably be saying, Please take it anyplace else but
Well,
here.
remember, Milwaukee was supposed to have it in COVID, and the Democrats dumped them. And that's one reason why the Republicans are going to say, "Hey, we're with you." Um, it is a zoo, as you know. I haven't been in for a few conventions. I wanted to go to the one in Cleveland, which that's too bad because that's my hometown. But
I did go to that one.
yeah,
I was in Cleveland in 2016. Yeah, I mentioned my comment.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
But you know what? The thing is, I didn't see anything of Cleveland. I did
no,
see the Guardians, right? I did
right,
see the Guardians on the bridge, and somebody
yeah,
had to point them out to me. But we were staying at a hotel. We were being bussed into these concentric rings of security.
yeah,
I saw the Browns stadium because it was part of that same complex, and it
yeah,
was within the security rings of the
yeah,
convention, which was kind
yeah.
of interesting. Actually, I didn't realize
It
how
was,
close that was. It was,
it was right downtown, and now the owners want to move it out, or at least they're threatening to move it out, so the city will pay more for renovations. It's 20 years old.
wait a minute,
And,
wait.
and
Renovations? You're
well,
right.
no, what
It was brand new.
they call it renovations. What it really is to put in more of the what do you call it? The big money booths
The
and
the luxury boxes. They want more
yeah,
luxury boxes. They want more.
yeah, exactly. And um, but anyway, the stadium is just it's close to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's
Which
right
I never
down,
got to see.
which is right down there on the lake. You could have gone and seen Jim Croce.
I wish I could have. But the thing is, and this is something that's true of business travel anyway, and I'm sure you've got tons of experience with this, is that when you're on business travel, basically all you're seeing is the same hotel room. It sounds really
Yeah,
exotic.
yeah,
Oh, we're going to send you on your employer is going to pay for this fabulous trip to this fabulous place, and all you see is the hotel room, right?
yeah,
I went to that. I think I've told this story before on the podcast, but I went to two different presidential conferences in Jerusalem. This is the Shimon Peres thing. It was they weren't consecutive years. I did 1 year, and then 3 years later they invited me, or 2 years later they invited me back. Scott Johnson went a couple of times as well. And the first time I was there, I literally saw nothing of Jerusalem until the last night I was there, and I only got out because a friend that I'd made at the conference, who was a advisor to the Knesset, found out that I hadn't been outside the hotel, and he was horrified. He says, "You've got to go outside."
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
and I mean, there was a lot of security for that too. That was one of those things where there's a lot of security around that. They didn't want to have any incidents with foreign press and foreign speakers and stuff like that. But we did. We finally, the last night I was there, we spent several hours going through in the middle of the night going through the old city.
Yeah, isn't
But
that fun? That's fun.
oh my gosh, it was so much fun. It was really, I mean, this guy was really an enthusiastic tour guide. Told me a lot of great stories. Um, took me to the Western Wall. It was really something. But that's like it's very similar to what happens in these at these conventions. We got outside the perimeter in 2008, but only because I knew the city.
Yeah, yeah,
It was in my backyard. It was in the Twin Cities, so I knew where to go. I knew what we could do, how we could get back in and stuff like that. But once you're inside that cocoon, you just really don't want to come out because it's just too much trouble. And so you
well,
don't get a chance to see any of that stuff. And probably any
yeah,
of those demonstrations are going to have almost zero impact on what you're doing on the inside.
right. It's just the income, the revenue that it brings to the city and the
Oh, sure.
taxes. The Cleveland is kind of interesting and perhaps unique in this that downtown, which I consider to be around the Terminal Tower and Public Square, there is the basketball arena for the women's team and the men's team, which I forget. and just down the street, where there used to be a parking lot, is the baseball stadium. So you can walk from the Sheraton or whatever. You can walk right into the baseball park, and then it's probably a 15-minute walk down to the Browns Stadium, and then a little bit more to the Hall of Fame. It's it's an interesting what do you call it, rebirth, I guess, of downtown Cleveland. And the river that used to be so polluted and everything is now clean, and they've got restaurants and shops and cafes along the banks called the Flats. It's a very very pretty place. I guess I saw the Guardians, but I wouldn't have known that there was nothing until they picked that name for the baseball
No.
team.
I'm not talking about the baseball team because they were
No. I know the statues.
The statues. Yeah.
They're on the bridge out of downtown. That will always be the Indians to me. I'm sorry.
I agree. Same here. I mean, that's a lame name.
The Guardians. Give me a break. I mean, that's the least obnoxious name they could pick, therefore the least interesting. But I had Chief Wahoo. I had my own little Indians uniform. Oh, that was a big deal.
Well, I mean, and that, that was, Cleveland. They had Chief Wahoo all over the place while we were there too.
Oh yeah.
But,
And by the way, Ed, this podcasting thing is old hat to me, because in 1954, I was or 53, I was the star of the Billy Buckaroo show on Saturday morning.
Well, there you go. So
Yeah.
yes, it is old hat for you, I guess.
Yeah. He would have maybe a dozen kids in as an audience, and we would watch a cowboy western movie. And during the commercials, there he is.
Speaking of old hat,
yeah.
this is not my hat. It clearly doesn't fit me, by the way. But this is a hat of a family friend. He's since passed. His name was Dudley, and he's a
and he left it to you.
Well, he left it to my mom, and my mom said, you think you could display this in the house? And I said, yeah, I think I can. So every show that I do,
there it is.
Dudley Taylor is right back there.
There he is. He lives on among us.
Among us, that's right. So I'm sorry. So keep going. You were saying that you were
no. I just
hat for you.
So I used to go. The new Brown Stadium is on the site of the old Brown Stadium, and I used to go to. I went to many Indians games there, and a few Browns games. And my dad, this is one of the tragedies in my life, Ed. 1954. The Indians set the record for most wins. I think it was 116 or something. And so they were going to the World Series. My dad came home and he said, I have 2 tickets to the World Series. And I was the biggest Indians fan you could ever imagine. I had scrapbooks and everything. Unfortunately, the Indians lost the first 4. That was the game where Willie Mays made the catch over his shoulder.
Yeah.
Son of a bitch. And so my dad had tickets to the 5th game. And so after that, I was out of baseball and I went for the Browns, which was good because Jim Brown came in, and Frank Ryan and Otto Graham was there. I mean, it was a great time until Art Modell moved in. But this is some good time. I've got a picture that I still have, and my best friend from my childhood, Dan Chrisman, was a general in the Army. He and I and our fathers walking away from an Indians game, and they had street photographers in those days. And here's this crummy little $1 photograph. It's great memories. I have many stories, but I won't bore everybody with them. However, those were the days where our mothers could put us on the Greyhound bus, and for 35 cents, we were about 26 miles out of town. for 35 cents, we could go into the terminal, Cleveland, downtown, and our dads would meet us and we would go to the game. How about that?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to move on to a different kind of ball game. Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden threatening to sue Fox News for publishing the material on his laptop, which he claims are private, intimate images, licensed. Apparently, I don't know, and that the material was hacked.
Wait a minute. So it's so important to him that he left them for months at the repair shop.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I mean, I find it interesting that Hunter wants to litigate this in open court more than he already has to in open court. And so I'm pretty sure that this is the legal equivalent of chin music. We just got done talking about baseball. But I mean, this is the second round of letters that they're sending off to Fox News, warning him that they're going to file a lawsuit unless Fox pulls all the stories and issues retractions and stuff like that. I don't know how, other than just, sheer chutzpah, one can make a claim that this was not newsworthy. And I don't understand how they're going to get to defamation, because you have to prove things were false. And so far, Hunter hasn't been able to do that. And he's certainly not a private person in relation to the Sullivan Standard. He's very much a public person in relation to the Sullivan Standard.
Yeah.
And
well, how do you prove that it's false if you're doing it? I didn't say that. Well, let's go to the videotape.
It's like those commercials, right? It's like those. I think it was Progressive Insurance. So the first Progressive Insurance commercial I thought was funny, which was, let's go to the replay. Somebody would say that there'd be an argument between two different people, and somebody throw the red flag out there. Let's go to the replay, and they'd be looking at, and the one person would go,
for a long time, Flo, the woman in the Progressive.
Yeah.
She was the highest paid spokesperson.
Well, I mean, she makes a ton of commercials for them. They must like it.
And every time they play, she gets more.
Right.
I had a friend who was a pilot for United Airlines. He's not a friend anymore, but he was going to work one day, and there was a camera. He works for United. He flew 747s to Hawaii. So he showed up at work one day, and there was a camera crew, and they were filming the plane and all that stuff. He said, okay, fine, I got to get to work. So he went in and he sat down in the cockpit. He was the captain, and guy motioned to him. He opened the sliding window, and the guy said, give us a salute. So he leaned out the window and he gave a salute. And he went back and closed the window. He forgot completely about it. And for years, every month, he would get $150 residual check because it was in a commercial that they ran.
I bet you didn't mind spending that money either.
No, he didn't. He was, what the hell is this for? Yeah, they just salute and you get big bucks. I like that kind of job.
I wouldn't mind that kind of job either. But you know what else kind of job that you clearly don't mind, because you're doing it week in and week out, is you're a VIP columnist.
Oh, yeah.
At redstate.com. And you've got a couple things here that you've done. I think one of these is a podcast, and the other is your column. Turns out collecting solar energy on home rooftops has an unexpected problem.
That they didn't anticipate.
Well, tell me about this, because I've actually considered putting solar panels on my.
And so did my son, one of my sons. Well, this is a problem in the sunny West. I don't think they have to worry about it in Minnesota, maybe Texas. But first of all, the first thing you need to know is, Ed, that the sun goes down at night.
No,
Yeah, yeah, which is one of the peak times for electricity.
it's true.
Yeah. So what happens? I mean, the daily schedule that they didn't anticipate, well, they could have, but they didn't, is that people get up in the morning and there's big demand for electricity. They're
Right.
making coffee, cooking eggs, toasters, all that stuff. And then the demand floofs off. Well, when people are making breakfast, the sun is barely up. So it's not doing a whole lot for them. Then when the sun is fully up in noon and the afternoon, everybody's at work. And the what do you call them? Solar panels on the roofs of homes are soaking up the energy, but there's nobody to use it. So in many cases in California, they just have to throw a switch and stop collecting the energy that all these houses are putting into the grid because there is no demand for them. And then the sun starts to set and it goes down. Everybody gets home from dinner and they start cooking and watching TV and DVRs and everything. Big demand, but goodbye, the sun has gone down. Now you can solve that if you have batteries, but they are very big, very heavy, and very, very expensive.
Yeah.
Like the batteries in Tesla or electric trucks.
You're exactly right. I used to work in call centers. It was my previous career, was working in call centers, and we were required to have generator backups. Generally speaking, natural gas, because it was an uninterruptible supply.
Yeah.
And theoretically unlimited supply. Of course, we're paying for it, but it wasn't just enough to have the generators. You had to have a battery system because you had to float the system while the generator was kicking on, because otherwise it's not going to do you any good. Everything's going to shut down anyway, right?
Yeah.
And you had to test this under load once a month, which I hated doing because it would degrade the batteries. I mean, it would literally degrade the batteries. And the battery cabinet in this thing was almost as big as one of my mainframe computers. And at the time, and of course, this is running much more equipment than you'd normally have in a house. But it was like $25,000 worth of batteries. And this has been 17 years since I've been in this business. And I'm certain that batteries are a lot more expensive than that now. There's the biggest thing now is the Tesla battery wall or something like that, or battery cabinet, which is all solid state battery storage. But that's expensive too, and you have to replace those cells because they wear out. When you use it, and generally speaking, what you're doing is you're putting the batteries in line of the power, right? And the reason you do that is so that if there's an issue with commercial power coming into your house, the spikes don't destroy your equipment, and also the batteries will take over while you're waiting for your generator to kick in, and so it becomes a constant. There's constant activity on those batteries, and they will degrade under those conditions. And every year I'd have to go through there and have all the batteries tested, and they're like car batteries. There's like an array of car batteries in this big, huge battery, right? Big car battery, like truck batteries. And you have to replace, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 of them every year, just because they go bad quicker. And at the end of 5 years, they're all past their life. And you'd have to replace them all. And I'd have to go and tell my boss, well, I got to spend $25,000 on batteries. He'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? It's like, well, don't test them under load. Well, it's more than just the testing under load. It's also the constant filtering of the power coming into the system. And by the way, I'm required to test them under load. And that was, Underwriters Laboratories. We had to be certified by Underwriters Laboratories. And that was one of the issues. They would come in every year and check your records.
Well, I heard online recently that they were talking about electric semi trucks, and they need 4 batteries, and each battery is 4 tons. So you're talking 16 tons of batteries on the truck. That's like a quarter of the load they could carry. Anyway,
So wait a minute. So what you're telling me is that you take 16 tons and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt.
Tennessee Ernie Ford.
Tennessee Ernie Ford.
Yeah.
How my soul to the company store.
Oh boy, isn't this fun for old timers?
Oh my gosh, I'm old.
Well, I'm older. So anyway, so it's kind of my point of the audio commentary was that governments too often here's a great idea, and they run off and do it when they don't think about the consequences. And there's several examples of this, including the electric car business.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'd still consider doing the rooftop solar systems. Here, you can sell the electricity back through the system like you can in California. I don't know that they ever turn them off. If they do, that'd be interesting to find out. But mostly just because I'm home all day. So for me, it makes a little bit more sense. I've got more demand going on during the day. Computer going on because I work from home. But it's really expensive to do. I looked into that when I moved to Texas 3 years ago. I unfortunately asked for some information from a solar panel,
provider.
Well, it wasn't even a provider. It was like a nonprofit organization, and they farmed it out to every single telemarketer you could imagine. And I actually narrowed it down to a couple people that were, fairly legit. And I had them draft up some numbers, and it was prohibitively expensive for us. And one guy said, well, look, what you do is you take out a loan, right? And you pay it off over 25 years. And about year 17, it will start paying for itself. You'll catch up to all the costs about year 17. And I said, man, I'm 58 years old. I don't know if I'm going to make it to year 17. And besides which, I came down here so I could get rid of debt, not so I can add to it. And
It's I would buy a hybrid car, but I would never buy.
I would look at it. Yeah.
I've been in them and they're wonderful. But I would never buy an electric car. I'd rather walk. I mean, did you see the electric cars in that snowstorm
in Chicago?
Well, I don't know. I saw the one in California where they were stuck there for days and the batteries ran out. And so there were people asking, could I get in your car just to stay alive, please?
Oh, yeah, that was a different one. Yeah.
Well, it'll cost you. So anyway, and then the column on Sunday, which was kind of a fun thing for me to write because, the whole point of this lawfare against Donald Trump and all these charges and grand juries and all this stuff was that to tie him up, so he couldn't campaign. Ed, have you noticed that Donald Trump is missing from the media these days?
Yeah.
No, it's not working, folks.
No, it's not working.
It's not working because he's so smart and he's a media magnet, and he just comes out of the court and makes news. So he doesn't have to campaign. And you say, "Wow, okay," but being in the court is bad for him. Well, yeah, except when they did the polls after he got charged, his support went up. So, we're not going to know until November if they're both in there. But anyway, so I wanted to write about how Trump is getting around all this lawfare gamesmanship that they're throwing at him. I thought it was kind of clever. He was kind of clever. Well, everybody knows I'm clever, but
of course you're clever. So that's over at redstate.com. I do have to ask about one more thing before we get to the jokes of the day, because honest to God, this is almost a joke of the day in and of itself. There are many things that one should keep in mind when you are in politics. And among those things that you should keep in mind is that you should never shoot the dog. But if you do, for God's sakes, don't write about it. Did you see this thing with Christine Noem?
Yeah. I mean, that was a disaster. And it proves one of the fundamental rules of politics. If you have to explain it, you lose. And it's just, unless something, a program, a quote, whatever, and that's why you always hear these people say, well, it was taken out of context. Then don't say it. I mean, you have to have discipline of the tongue, because it's going to be distorted. So yeah. And I don't know, I'm just guessing. I think she thought it would show decisiveness in the face of, I don't know what. I think the dog bit a neighbor and she had to pay damages, and
the dog killed a few chickens.
Yeah.
It was a 14-month-old puppy, right?
Yeah.
And it was snapping at people, and it went after the neighbor's chickens. They were trying to train it to be a bird dog, and apparently didn't have any interest in doing that.
Well, he got the idea. It's just that it's a little premature. I have to shoot them first. I don't really want to talk about this too much. This is disturbing.
I don't want to talk about the issue.
It's so stupid. No, you're absolutely right. It's just plain stupid. And if you do it, don't talk about it. And,
why would you write
sure
about
as hell don't write about it. Gee,
why would you write about it?
Why would you? I mean, presumably, but when what's his name? George W. Bush ran for president. He wrote, or people helped him write, or somebody wrote for him, sort of an autobiography about his life. And I was one of the people they asked to read it and see if you see any landmines. I didn't, but yeah, that's the kind of thing where if you're reading your script and it says, so then, as governor of South Dakota, I shot my puppy. No, do we have to use this? I don't. Yeah, censorship. This is when censorship helps.
Well, it's editorial discretion, I think, is the mark here. Nobody's telling her that she can't write about this. We're all just wondering why the hell she would think to even include this story.
Yeah.
I mean, all right.
Well, I hope.
I know this is
she was smart as governor, and I liked a lot of the stuff she did. But if Trump picks her for vice president, then the whole campaign is going to be about that. The same way it was about Sarah Palin. Oh, you don't read the New York Times? I mean, it's just pathetic. That was 2008 when I met you in St. Paul. And I have to say, every year or two, I go back and look at Palin's acceptance speech as the vice president. And boy, that's I know the guy that helped write it. It's a very good speech, but not many people know. If you go look to YouTube and look at her speech from 2008 to the convention, you cannot tell that for the first 10 minutes, the teleprompter was not working.
Yeah.
Now put yourself in this place, Ed. So fortunately, Palin knew her stuff and she practiced it, and she pretty much knew what was going to come up on the teleprompter was sort of a reminder. But imagine the mental dexterity you need, that you're in front of millions of people making the most important speech of your life. You're speaking and the teleprompter gets too slow. So the teleprompter is telling you things that you said already.
Yep.
Oh my God, the mind games you've got to play to skip it because you're several minutes ahead. Oh, so anyway, you can't tell. She's really good at that. and she's very good at PR. And she used to stay in audiences like Taylor Swift did. TV audience, she'd stay and meet with everybody. She did that at CPAC. I watched her. She stayed extra 45 minutes after she spoke at CPAC, and the whole afternoon ended. And she stayed with her crowd over in that part of the auditorium at what was it, Waldorf House or somewhere, Warren House. Remember where it was? It was out in the woods. That's where your wife talked with Governor Perry.
Oh no, that was in
it wasn't Maryland.
No, that was in DC. Yeah, that was at
that's what I said.
Yeah, Waldom. Was it Waldom?
Something like that. Anyway, she stayed to talk and do selfies and all that stuff. And to my mind, that's very smart. Very, very smart. You watch some athletes do that. Anyway, I recommend people look at that speech. Someday, maybe for fun, I have CDs, very first CDs of presidents giving speeches.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah. So I've got a CD of Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, William Jennings Bryan. I think there's a Wilson in there. I don't know about McKinley. That might have been too early, but there's a whole bunch of, and Ed, the eloquent language. Of course, they had to speak. They were used to speaking to crowds. So if you weren't close, you couldn't hear.
Right.
But the language, all these clauses, you had to follow the language. Now, this clause goes with what they were saying, but I mean, it would never work today. As sound bites, you need 12 words in a sentence, and that's it. But anyway, it's really kind of fun to hear that you don't. Well, I did, but no one else probably wants to listen to the whole speeches. But and Teddy Roosevelt's voice, it's not a boomer like you would expect.
Yeah, George Patton had a high-pitched voice and was kind of a thin, reedy voice.
Yeah.
So if you're used to George C. Scott's Patton, it didn't sound anything like that. And Patton was aware of it. And he said that's the reason why, he explained once, that's the reason why I curse so much. It's because that way people get the message, right? Because the tenor of his voice, the tenor and timbre of his voice wasn't really suited for that. So he would just load it up with a bunch of profanities and make people.
Wasn't commanding. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't commanding. Exactly.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're going to get to the jokes of the week here, but don't forget to read Andrew's stuff over at redstate.com. He's got a couple of really good entries over there. How Trump overcomes Dems' legal obstacles and campaigns anyway. And turns out collecting solar energy on home rooftops has an unexpected problem. You're definitely going to want to take a look at both of those. And Andrew, I'm turning it over to you. What's your joke of the week?
Well, I have a joke, and I have to. You always talking about your sources. My source is Ronald Reagan. Okay, so a farmer is driving down a country road. He's going about 45, and he looks out the window of his pickup, and there's a chicken running right next to him, 45. He can't believe it. So he speeds up to 60. Chicken speeds up with him. And after a little while, the chicken runs ahead of him, leaves him behind in the dust. And then he turns down a side road. So the farmer can't stand it. He stops, goes down the side road, and there's a farmer in his yard. Chicken runs right through the yard. And the guy says, I saw a chicken with 3 legs, and he was running so fast. And the farmer says, yeah, I breed them. You breed chickens with 3 legs? So, yeah. So, well, I like drumsticks. My wife likes drumsticks, and our son likes drumsticks. So we want to have them. He said, really? Chickens with 3 legs. So how do they taste? The farmer says, I don't know. I never caught one.
That would be a problem. That might be a problem. All right, I was gonna pick an R-rated one, but I think I'm gonna pick the cleaner of the 2 options that I have in front of me
That's
for the recording.
Good. Yeah.
So a dietitian is addressing an audience, right? And the dietitian says the material we put into our stomachs is enough to have killed most of us sitting here years ago. Red meat is awful. Soft drinks erode your stomach lining. Chinese food is loaded with MSG. Vegetables can be disastrous, and none of us realizes the long-term harm caused by the germs in our drinking water. But there is one thing, the dietitian says, that is the most dangerous of all, and we have all eaten or will eat it. Can anyone tell me what food it is that causes the most grief and suffering for years after eating it? And this 75-year-old man shot to his feet and said, I know that answer, wedding cake.
Yeah.
Jokesoftheday.net. It's another good one, jokesoftheday.net.
Yeah, Dad, you just skip it, Ed. Just skip it.
I had another
our sponsor is Salem.
Had another one. I'm just saying, but I think I've thought better of that one. We'll just go with that one.
That's a good thinking, Ed.
Thank you very much. Andrew Malcolm, the prince of Twitter, the regent of redstate.com, at AH Malcolm on the Twitters is. Great talking with you again. We'll do it again next week, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Edward. Thanks, everybody. See you then.